Hi guys, welcome back. We're covering Module 53 tonight. We're going to be talking about landfills and incineration. So our learning objectives after reading this module, you should be able to describe the goals and function of a solid waste landfill and explain the design and purpose of a solid waste incinerator. So we're talking about where trash goes and burning trash. Okay, so we just finished our module on reusing, recycling, and composting, so about 34% goes to that. The rest gets either discarded or burned, so this is the portion of the pie we're talking about tonight. Okay, so some common vocabulary terms you need to be familiar with before we go into this next part of the lesson. So first is leachate, or leachate. I'm going to go with leachate. So leachate is the liquid that contains pollutants that comes out of landfill waste. So after having a bunch of solid waste sitting in a massive hole in the ground, things leak out of it, and we call that leachate. And this is what we're worried about getting into soil and getting into waterways, and what we do a really good job of preventing from leaving landfills at this point. And one of the ways we do this is through the process of a sanitary landfill. And this is what most landfills are now, but these are landfills that are designed to hold municipal solid waste without contaminating anything around them, to make it so that there's the least amount of contamination possible surrounding the area around that landfill. So that is all to prevent any leachate from ever getting into water or soil or near people in that area. Okay, so now that you know those terms, we'll move on. So what are some components of a landfill? So basically a landfill is a giant hole in the ground, and usually what it is, it's lined. So they dig this giant hole in the ground, and how big the hole is depends on the plot of land. But basically they'll dig a hole and they'll determine approximately how much trash is being produced daily per capita, and they'll determine how big the hole needs to be based on how long they want that landfill to be in operation and how much municipal solid waste they think it'll hold. So a landfill may have a 40-year capacity, it may have a 60-year capacity based on what the average municipal solid waste production is per capita for that time frame, and they may include potential population increases and things like that. So they dig this big hole. Then what they do is they line the bottom of the landfill with something like a clay or a plastic or a combination of both in order to prevent anything from seeping into the soil. This prevents water flow, and it retains these positively charged ions. Remember, we said there's this cation exchange that's happening. It prevents things from getting into, and metals from getting into the soil, which we don't want. We don't want that leachate to get out. Then, under that, there's this pipe system that's put into place, and that's what's actually going to pump out all of this liquid, this leachate that's going to be produced from all of this trash that's been sitting here, from all this MSW that's been sitting there. Sometimes they'll actually take it and they'll put it back into the landfill because it helps with decomposition, but the biggest thing is they don't want it seeping into the soil or into the water. Once the landfill has reached its full capacity, meaning 40 or 60 years has gone by or whatever, they'll place a cap on it. And the cap is usually made of soil or clay. Now, the landfill that's near us, that Coyote Ranch or whatever they call it, that has been capped off. It's actually been sitting for 10 plus years, and it's actually ready to be reused. So that land can be reclaimed, and I think they're building like a... what do they call that? What is a 9-hole golf course called? Like a short course or something? I think they're building a golf course there. But it's been capped, and technically the land has been deemed safe to be used, and there's no leachate that would hurt people if they were to reuse that land. Okay, so landfill operation. Basically, once the municipal solid waste gets there, once the trash truck comes and drops it off, they compact it. They compact it as small as they can into these small cells so it takes up less space. This will basically increase the capacity of the landfill. If they put everything in as is, it wouldn't be packed very nicely, and you wouldn't get as much in there. It's sort of like when you pack for a vacation, you put everything in really, really nicely when you first fly there, but then on your way back home, you shove it all in the suitcase and it barely fits, kind of like that. So once the landfill has reached capacity, then it gets sealed. It gets sealed off from the outside world entirely. And again, the goal of this is to prevent any water from getting in. Basically, once water gets into that, this is what's going to increase the smell of a landfill. Landfills don't smell great, and it will also increase the decomposition, which could potentially lead to more leachate. After all those years have passed, then the landfill can be reclaimed. Now, landfills are usually really expensive to construct, despite it sounding simple. Giant hole in the wall, giant hole in the ceiling, wall, giant hole in the ground. They're expensive. So generally it costs money to put things in a landfill, which is why you get charged every month. So it's called the tipping fee, and this is a fee for charging for the disposal of material into a landfill or an incinerator. So even if you want it, you can go to your local landfill and dump whatever waste you would like, but they're going to charge you to get in. It kind of depends on what they charge you will depend on what you're trying to dump and if it needs to be dealt with specially, things like that. This is sort of, the tipping fee is a couple things. One, to make money to pay back the landfill, but two, it's an incentive to sort of produce less waste, because the more waste you produce, the more money you're going to owe. That's sort of the idea behind it. But the problem is the cost can't be too high on to use a landfill, because people are going to start illegally dumping if they feel like it's unreasonable to pay that much money to dump trash. They'll just start leaving it on the side of the road or putting in fresh waterways or things like that. So they have to keep the price reasonable so people still continue to dispose of trash properly. Okay, so here's sort of what's happening in landfill. Here are these massive holes in the ground. Here is that clay lining. Here are those pipes that are collecting the leachate. Here is the compactor that's compacting trash so that the capacity is increased on this big hole in the ground. And remember, we will be creating methane, because methane is part of the microbial decomposition process of trash, and usually that methane is either burned off and sold, like it is at the place right next to stage, or it's trapped so it's not allowed to escape into the air. It's either extracted or burned off or collected for use as fuel. There it is. So this is sort of what it would look like, but you'll also notice that the cell has been closed off with soil and clay, and they're allowing for short grasses to grow on top of it. So this land is being reclaimed. Okay, so where are landfills located? Location is actually really important. So first you have to look for an area that has a loam or clay loam types of soil, where you can put a clay soil lining in it. So the type of soil will be an important component to where a landfill goes. This is sort of the ideal. It shouldn't be located anywhere near any body of water where potential leachate can get in and pollute it. It shouldn't be anywhere near people, again, potentially if that leachate gets out, or the smell, things like that. It shouldn't be anywhere near people. Plus, there'll be a lot of traffic from trucks. They don't want people near that. Could attract vermin or ants, things like that, insects. They don't want people near that. Now, it can't be too far away, because it still needs to operate on the grid. Energy needs to be pumped in, and it needs to be able to put energy back on the grid if they're burning off methane to put energy on the grid. So it can't be too far away, and you also want it to be somewhat close to where municipal solid waste is being produced, like a city, because you have to transport that municipal solid waste. You don't want to use too much energy in transportation, right? Because if you're constantly driving back and forth this very long distance to bring trash through, it becomes counterintuitive because you're using a ton of energy. So it has to be somewhere near where the waste is being sort of created. Now, the actual choosing of a site can be kind of a political drama, I guess. So this is where there's a lot involved here. So it has to be, one, decided on by the public. So a lot of times, not anybody wants to live near a landfill. A lot of people don't want to live near nuclear power plants and landfills. Go figure. So where they actually end up putting one oftentimes results in whoever has the smallest voice, right? And unfortunately, that ends up coming from lower socioeconomic status areas where neighbors have basically lack the resources to be able to have an effective opposition. So there's this concept, they call it NIMBY, and it's not in my backyard is what it stands for. And it's this attitude that people sort of develop, like, I don't want a landfill there, I don't want a nuclear power plant there. And a lot of times it's people who have money or political influence that determine, like, hey, it's not happening here. And then it ends up going into an area where people don't have the same political influence or financial backing. So siting can sometimes be of political turmoil, depending on where it ends up going. But it also has to be in an area that, again, isn't near water, has the correct type of soil, is energy efficient, things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. It can't be somewhere where it's going to affect the environment or the wildlife population or things like that either. Okay, so what are the environmental consequences of landfills? So, of course, no matter how much engineering you do on this, on designing of a landfill, there's always the possibility that the leachate is going to contaminate something adjacent, waterways, soil, things like that. It'll be impossible to collect all of that, so you'll always have some. It's always going to be producing methane gas, just like the one next to us, and methane is a greenhouse gas, so you always run the risk of emitting greenhouse gases if you're not properly maintaining those methane emissions. Okay. Next is incineration. This is another way to treat waste materials. This is essentially burning it. You would burn it for a couple reasons. It reduces the volume and mass of things, which means it's going to take up less space in your landfill, which means you'll be able to use that landfill for much, much longer. You can also, by burning things, generate heat and electricity, and we'll look at that later, but that's called waste to energy. So some other important vocab, ash. This is the residual non-organic material that does not combust during incineration, so it's what's left behind. You've probably seen ash before if you've ever burned something in a fireplace or in a fire pit. Bottom ash is the residue collected at the bottom of the combustion chamber of the furnace. This has to be dealt with properly because usually it can't just be put in a landfill because it contains something that may be harmful to soils or things like that. And fly ash is what's coming out of your exhaust. That's what's being emitted into the air. And waste energy is using the heat energy that is being created from burning whatever you're burning and converting it into an energy source rather than just losing that heat and not using it. Okay, so we've got waste that gets dumped in. Crane moves material from bunker to hopper. Hopper is what receives whatever is being burned. It gets burned in this incineration chamber. The ash is collected and removed from the plant. The ash will be put in a landfill or disposed of in a proper landfill for pollutant type municipal solid waste. Baghouse filters, you guys learned about these. This helps clean the air, so it helps trap that particulate matter before it escapes through the chimney. And then if you are doing a waste to energy, the heat will then be captured and we'll be using it to generate electricity. So it's a pretty simple process. Okay, what are the environmental consequences of incineration? You're going to be producing carbon dioxide. You're going to be producing particulate matter. Tipping fees are going to be higher at incinerators because the environmental cost of incinerators is much higher. You've got your air pollutants. You're also potentially burning plastics and metals, and those are toxic when burned, potentially toxic when burned. You've got ash, which has to be dealt with in a very specific way because it's probably toxic, so it can't go into the same landfill as other types of municipal solid waste. So you have the energy that is then required to deal with this special type of municipal solid waste. Now, if you go to these websites, these look at the Orange County landfills. So we have actually one of the highest rated sanitary landfills in the United States. It is one of the safest landfills. It's the cleanest. It's also a nature preserve. It's very beautiful in terms of landfills. You can go visit it. You can tour it. It's very impressive. They are producing energy from this landfill. It's very cool. It's very impressive. And then there's Coyote Canyon, of course, which is producing methane that is being burned off and producing energy for homes in Anaheim, California. So go ahead and take a look at those. They're interesting. I highly recommend it. and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.